Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Global Philanthropic panel on Catalyzing Methane Emissions Reduction. My name is Larry Kramer, and I'm the president at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Today's panel is about the role of philanthropy and what it can do in driving climate ambition. Our hopes are that the efforts of current funders, and especially a new collaborative effort that we'll talk about shortly, will inspire other philanthropists to join at scale the effort to mitigate climate change and to do so in ways that address its disparate consequences on different communities. Today, we discuss what philanthropy can do to address one of the most dangerous and consequential pollutants, methane. As I'm sure you all know, methane is a super pollutant, among the most dangerous of greenhouse gases, responsible for almost half of the warming we've already suffered. And because it is short-lived, with most of its consequences felt quickly, removing methane quickly can have outsized effects in reducing warming in the short run, while going far towards our longer-term effort to meet the goals of the Paris Accord. And that's why the people in front of you today have come together and committed an initial $328 million in funding over the next 3 years to reduce methane emissions globally by supporting the newly announced Global Methane Pledge. Nations joining the pledge have promised to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. We'll help them do that, but we hope to go further and raise their ambitions even more. I'm honored to introduce today's panelists. Please help me in welcoming Kate Hampton, Chief Executive Officer of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, more commonly known as CIF. Per Hegenes, Chief Executive Officer of the IKEA Foundation. John Palfrey, President of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. And before we get started, I would also like to introduce Richard Lawrence, the founder and CEO of the High Tide Foundation, which has been pivotal alongside these other leaders in getting this work going. He's joining us from San Francisco, California, and will be sharing a few words with us. So welcome, Richard.
Welcome to everybody in Glasgow and millions more listening in from around the world. I am so proud to be able to join you for this methane moment at COP26. I am Richard Lawrence of High Tide Foundation, and I am thrilled to announce that 22 philanthropic donors have committed more than $300 million to help accelerate the reduction of global methane emissions. On behalf of the climate philanthropists, I am honored to thank the signatories of the Global Methane Pledge. Your leadership to dramatically reduce methane emissions by the end of this decade inspired the donor community to build on your ambition. I just ask one thing. Don't stop at 30% reduction of methane by 2030. It's time to aim high. People in all corners of the world increasingly understand that methane is the fastest down payment that humans can make on climate change. The IPCC report could not have been clearer. Methane is simply a battle that we must win. Defeat on methane will nearly preclude us from reaching the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. That would be devastating to our communities. On the other hand, success will give us between 0.2 and 0.3 degrees Celsius of avoided warming and provide us with critical time to beat CO2. Methane leaks come from three main sources: oil and gas, landfills, and agriculture. Reducing methane emissions from all three sectors must be one of the planet's climate priorities over the coming decade. The philanthropic community stood up today with $300 million, but we will need help from governments, corporations, nonprofits, citizens, and our leading technology companies. One example of the technology that the world requires is Carbon Mapper. This nonprofit will deliver open source data with precise resolution and scale coverage from satellites that will drive mitigation of methane. The funders who committed $300 million over 3 years are ready to support leaders who are rising to our methane moment. What is our commitment to the world? Well, we're creating a hub structured to meet the challenges posed by methane. We'll be nimble and entrepreneurial. We will allocate the donor capital to the most catalytic opportunities. We'll be flexible and open to mid-course corrections, as demanded by the fast-moving methane challenge. We will support the creation of scale solutions for landfill and agricultural industries, where the science is advancing fast, but more needs to be done. We will support technology transfers to fund high-impact opportunities around the planet. And we're going to be all about collaboration and impact. As a sign that we're not messing around, donor capital will start flowing out to grantees and recipients of technical assistance as soon as January 2022. Again, I would like to thank my fellow donors for their generosity, trust, and commitment. And in closing, I encourage leaders in all of our communities to embrace the methane moment. It is a fight we can and must win. Thank you very much.
Outstanding. Well, it is such an honor to be here today representing the huge ecosystem of organizations around the world that are ready to enter into a sprint to turn this Global Methane Pledge into action. And of course, the Global Methane Hub we're here to discuss today is a huge part of that. And the global philanthropies involved represent organizations really from around the world, and foundations that don't necessarily exclusively just focus on climate. So I was very interested to learn that the Children's Investment Fund Foundation and the IKEA Foundation were some of the early founders of this effort. I'm curious to hear from both of you what inspired your organization to join, and also what message you would have to others in philanthropy considering investing in this effort, starting with you, Per.
Well, what can you not be inspired by? 50% of net warming comes from methane, and we hardly talk about methane, right? And so the question is really, what took us so long to get here? Now we're here, we're very happy to be one of the first movers in this, and I think the way we actually put this on the agenda is to have a really unprecedented collaboration of different foundations stepping up and funding the initiatives in the way only foundations can do. So, for example, I would say 3 key areas for me are important. First of all, put it on the agenda, making sure that we advocate properly, that we get this out to as many organizations, governments, and individuals as possible, so they really understand the impact of methane and what we can do about it. Secondly, we talked about technology, you heard about technology. Of course, the unique thing for foundations is that we can take risk, we can invest in emerging technologies, we can afford to fail and learn from that failure, because others will not be able to do that, and they don't want to do that. So as a foundation, we have that unique capability to put money against that. Thirdly, of course, we need to hold people to account. We need to look at the commitments that are being made by countries, by companies, and we need to verify those commitments and hold them to account. So we need to fund organizations that can actually do that in a neutral way. So I think there are multiple areas where foundation can make a difference, and I'm really excited about and really proud about being one of the first movers on this pledge, because we have so much work to do.
Thank you, Per. And we'll turn to you, Kate.
Yeah, so 3 things, children, science, and partnership. So 1 billion of the world's children, that's half the world's children, are in areas extremely vulnerable to climate change. Moreover, we know that methane is a precursor for air pollution. 9 out of 10 people on the planet live breathing unsafe air. This is a critical problem for health now, and it's an accelerating problem for health going forward. In terms of the science, we know we need to cut methane emissions by at least 75% in this decade. A quarter of those emissions come from oil and gas. We also know from the experience of the Clean Development Mechanism that with a very low carbon price, you can actually capture landfill methane without too much difficulty. This is simply an execution problem. It requires a mission orientation to move at scale. And this is why the third point is so important, which is partnership. 5 years ago, many of the same donors and others and governments got together for the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol to do a similar effort on HFCs. We've learned from that effort. We're now doing something bigger and faster with more partners on methane. That partnership is absolutely crucial. And the exciting thing now, as Richard was saying, is we've entered a new era of climate accountability. We're going to have real-time data from satellites, identifying where the methane is, identifying those that aren't keeping their promises. And civil society have been working on this issue for a long time and now going to be supercharged to hold governments and corporations to account, and we can work collaboratively, providing technical assistance for those that are really committed to solving the problem.
This is so exciting to hear, Kate. Thank you. And with more than 100 countries signing on to this global pledge, how will that work in terms of where the hub invests? Do you aim to be funding work in all of these countries?
I think it's really important to be purposeful and to prioritize carefully. There is a large existing ecosystem of players, many of whom have been working on this issue. Some have a technical orientation, some will be involved in litigation, some will be involved in communications and advocacy. And as we've done in the past with Philanthropy, we will be working together to identify who's ready to go, where there's capacity to execute. And we encourage members of civil society, governments and others to come forward with really sharp proposals at scale.
Terrific, Kate. Thank you. And John, can you tell us about the MacArthur Foundation's decision to invest in this effort, and also share with us your perspective on what this $328 million might hopefully be able to accomplish?
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here with each of you, and I think just as the IKEA Foundation and SIF have said, this was not a hard decision to support this pledge and this moment. And I think there are a lot of reasons why there is a methane moment or a methane moment right now. I think it is because there has been political will to take it on, and that's been demonstrated by multiple countries and multiple funders. I think there's a great playbook, which was this Kigali example, which I think has, as Kate said, has been leveled up in this important way. But also I think because we see that the methane agenda is an environmental justice message too, because we know that the harms are disproportionately felt by certain people in our societies. In the United States, that's often black individuals who are living close by to some of these harms. And we know that there is the long-term climate harm, but there also are short-term health harms as well. And so I would note the 400,000 premature deaths, the 624,000 asthma cases and so forth that we believe could be eliminated and reduced, particularly by marginalized communities, if we're able to make this effective. And so this funding that is going to be for technical assistance, for research, for support for many, many countries, we hope to be taking this pledge. I think it's going to make an enormous difference in terms of environmental justice.
Thank you, John. And to dig deeper on the Kigali effort, can you share with us some of what you learned through that effort that might be applicable here in the methane space, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Kate really made the case for why this is a great follow-on to that effect. And when I stepped into the role at MacArthur Foundation, I asked very wise foundation president what was the most effective thing they thought they had done. And they cited that Kigali amendment, the fact that philanthropy could step up at a key moment, supporting governments and supporting others who, as Kate said, can do this really at scale. And I think some of the facts speak for themselves. The idea that phase one just concluded could expect to capture 4.2 gigatons of avoided CO2 emissions by 2050 as a result of this Kigali Amendment and the work that's been done to get many countries to take this pledge and to address it. Of course, we're seeing countries still doing the work to do that. But I think that there is a great playbook here that has been proven in the Kigali setting. It's being proven here in this methane moment. And I think it is what we need to be doing in collaboration to get this done.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And Per, we have now more than 20 foundations participating, as I understand it. What is next for the hub? Where do you see this going?
Well, at least double that number, triple that number, getting more foundation to join us, because size matters and numbers matters, because when we have more people talking about the same problem, engaging in the same problem, we have a more powerful coalition. So there's no question about it. This is the moment where we can get to a point where we maybe even reach a certain tipping point where everyone wants to be part of it, because they start to understand how extremely important this is, and how we can actually make a huge difference by addressing methane in the way we have made an effort to address carbon for many years already.
A positive tipping point, a positive social tipping point. I love it. Terrific. I want to get the audience on their toes now because we are going to have some time for audience questions in just a minute. Let's see. This is such a fascinating discussion. I think that we will now open it up to the audience to chime in with some additional questions. We have about 20 minutes. So go ahead, and you'll have to be stepping right or be a little bit loud. And perhaps Larry or Lauren with the extra mic can help us out here. Terrific. Thank you. Any takers?
If there's no questions, shall I say something about finance? Would be helpful.
Please chime in now. Yes.
So just to situate this in this COP in this particular moment, yesterday you would have seen this wave of capital from the private sector advertised. And I think the really crucial thing is how do we capture this capital for the solutions? That's really the challenge for the next few days at COP and coming out of the COP. It's a call to action for all of us. We need to create the right enabling environment to channel that private capital to the solutions. So where can philanthropy play a key role? And we encourage you to join anyone in civil society here today. It's going to require a huge collaborative effort of public-private partnership along supply chains, in particular communities. We talked about landfill, we talked about air pollution, we talked about the oil and gas sector. We need civil society to step up, hold corporations to account, hold investors to account, and we need governments to step in and regulate so that this wave of capital that has been advertised at the COP can actually flow into the solutions, and not just in the rich world, but where the money is really needed. 70% of the abatement that we need for climate change is happening in the emerging economies. We need to make sure that the multilateral development banks and others are joining this effort to ensure that countries have the just transition capital that they need to make this accelerated reduction of 75% this decade.
Outstanding. Thank you. Any other additional comments before we open it to the floor? John, Per?
Open it to the floor.
Open it to the floor. Okay. Yes.
So I have the mic. Hi, everyone. I'm Harriet Bulkley. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography at Durham University, and I've been working on cities and climate change action for the last 25 years or so. A lot of the suggestions that you're looking at here for reducing methane will be urban, so addressing methane where it affects air pollution and in terms of also the landfill gas. What have we learned from attempts to do that under previous climate financing initiatives that tell us how we can do this in a way that's actually also just for the communities in which it's going to take place? Thanks.
Can I speak to the landfill example?
Sure.
Landfill is probably the area I know most about in your question. It's really important to understand that many low-income cities, waste is one of the biggest emitters, and then it moves to transport and then to buildings as cities become richer. That's where that's the emissions pathway. So when it comes to landfill, you often have people living off the landfill. Some people call them scavengers or waste pickers, but they're people who are actually living on the landfill. It's really important to find employment opportunities for those communities, number one. Number two, a lot of waste is informal. So that means formalizing the waste sector, which means municipal finance. Three, we know from the clean development mechanism that with a very small carbon price, you can actually incentivize municipalities to capture that carbon. So it's really important that we think about this holistically. Just transition for the communities that are living off the landfill, improving their local environment, formalizing the waste sector so that you can track and invest. And then actually the cost is relatively simple. The complexity is the formalization, the coordination of different municipal governments, financing, and so on. So that's where we need to step in. So oil and gas is the first wave. Some of these more complex urban challenges will come second. But we'd really like to invite you to participate and share your ideas.
Outstanding. And John, would you like to come in on the equity and justice component?
I would. I think this is such an important question on many levels, but I think I would cite the Clean Air Task Force, its finding that more than 1 million black people in the United States live within a half mile of oil and methane facilities. And I think that when we look at the direct effects, such as asthma, that are deriving from this, you can see the importance of ensuring a just transition. So the harms, of course, are disproportionately felt. And then I think, as Kate said, this needs to be about investing in the clean energy jobs, of course, for the same communities. And that is true on a global scale, but it's also true within the wealthiest nations in the world. And so I think finding those solutions that are win-wins in these ways are going to be so crucial. And I feel like that's one of the reasons we're in a methane moment.
excellent question to break the ice, too. I appreciate it. Thank you. It looks like we have another question over here.
Hi, yes, I'm Wiley Barber. I work at the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute, and I direct the Caribbean Cooperative MRV Hub, so 12 countries in the Caribbean that are on the front lines of climate change impacts. Many of them have large methane emission problems. And I wondered to what extent you might be looking at what countries are putting forward in terms of their NDCs to help prioritize the funding on this. And I love the discussion on landfills. I inspected landfills when I started my career. So
Terrific question. Who would like to take that one? Any takers?
I would not like to take it because we haven't started our work on methane. We just totally convinced that this is something we need to engage with. So we're going to learn from the other foundation and join in and see how we can be effective in supporting.
I'd like to propose an idea, but we've got to work this through and be really interested in your thoughts on it. You will have seen the Just Transition transaction of South Africa, where a number of donors have come together to finance the coal transition for South Africa around a utility called Eskom and the communities around that. We need to start thinking about what are the other just transition transactions around the world. And for some countries and municipalities, waste might be a key area. So if we can get enough scale and we can get financing mechanisms and stakeholders to come together and negotiate this transition, this is exactly the kind of thing that could attract capital at scale. So I think in terms of NDC financing, we've seen a number of countries step forward with really ambitious pledges. I was on a panel today with the Environment Minister of Pakistan. They've pledged to halve their emissions by 2030 with finance. If they can package up the elements of their economy, and methane is certainly an issue there in terms of waste management and agriculture, then they might get access to large-scale financing. I think the tricky thing is the aggregation, the product preparation. So if we can help countries with technical assistance to prepare fulfillment of their NDCs, then capital will flow. But it's really important that the donors step up and the multilateral development banks and the DFIs.
A combined effort.
Yeah.
Terrific. I see another question.
Jonathan Banks with the Clean Air Task Force. First of all, thank you guys for doing what you're doing. It's fantastic. Quick question, though, on the Global South. Most of the money that's been spent in this space to date has been spent in, the philanthropic money has been spent in North America and Europe. How is the Methane Hub going to seek to prioritize to get funds out to support efforts in the Global South?
Good question.
Yeah.
Kate?
Yeah. It is a sad fact that most philanthropic capital flows to the richest countries of the world. And that is a fundamental challenge to our sector that needs to be addressed. And I know there are a number of people in this room who are really purposeful in their efforts to ensure that more philanthropic capital is actually flowing to the communities who will provide the solutions to their problems. I think it's a process of institution building, of technical assistance, of exchange, but actually a lot of the solutions are already there in the South. They're just not well known. They don't have access to the capital. They don't have access to the decision makers. So this hub needs to provide a bridge, and we really need to focus on bringing forward those local solutions around cities and others so that those communities can access this capital. It's really important that the NGO sector and governments from developing countries actually have access to this finance. Access is the crucial issue.
Promising. John? Yep.
And I would say I think we would not have participated in this were it not seeking to accomplish this kind of goal. For MacArthur Foundation, where we have offices in Nigeria, in India, the idea here clearly is to provide a combination of things, whether it's technical assistance and otherwise, to ensure that emerging economies can be a central part of this, are bringing the solutions forward. So I do think that we should be held accountable for that. We should be tracking that as we put this into place. And I think we should be changing the curve, changing the way in which we do this going forward. And I hope that this will be a start to a new day in that respect.
Per, did you want to come in?
Well, I think from our perspective, we don't have any offices in any parts of the world except for our main office where we conduct all our grant making. I think when I look at this and have a look at this and compare to what the work that we do in climate change in general, I would be very optimistic about looking at where we can have the most impact, because methane, at least with the impact in the atmosphere, doesn't know any borders. So what we want to do is cut as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and that means that we have to be smart about where we put the money, whether it's in the south or in the north, doesn't really matter to me as long as we cut as much as possible. Having said that, of course, I agree with Kate in the fact that so much money goes to the Western world and not in the Global South. And for us and the work that we do, I would think the majority of the money that our foundation provides is going to the Global South in different ways that we operate. But definitely in this case, I would be opportunistic. I would look at where we can have the biggest impact quickly as possible.
Terrific. We have another question, it looks like.
Having a little trouble over here.
Welcome. Terrific.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Beverly Wright. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. And our African American and poor communities all over have struggled with landfills being in their community. But with the increase of hurricanes, tornadoes, all of these disastrous severe weather events, the waste problem becomes more severe. So we know that climate change is the cause of us having more of these storms, but it also means we're having more waste, which leads to more methane. I don't believe that many cities like the ones that I live in have given a whole lot of thought to how they're going to deal with waste. We're dealing with dumping right now, mostly in our communities. We have a community in Pensacola that has 13 landfills and growing in one black community. So the methane issue is definitely one for poor people, even in what we consider rich countries. And I think that I would like to see poor communities involved in these discussions just a little bit more. And, the help of really large finance companies, I'm calling them banks, really think about investing in our large urban cities that are poor and really dealing with waste at a level that we could never conceive of before.
Thank you. This is certainly an intertwined system. Comments on this piece?
I really would just underscore the very good point, which is to say that I do think that the methane campaign is really an environmental justice campaign in a fundamental way. So we've talked about the inequities on a global scale, but I think the inequities within wealthy countries are so clearly brought about here. And I cited earlier statistics about the proximity of black communities to many of these sources of emission. I think that the speakers made a very good case for that in her community. So I do think there are many reasons to do this, certainly the overall climate change agenda, but I think also from an equity perspective, this is where those things are aligned. And I don't think we've had enough of a focus on the effects of methane on direct marginalized communities, particularly in the United States.
So often the methane is released alongside other hazardous air pollutants, ozone-forming compounds. So yes, it really does seem like a win-win if we can cut down on these emissions and certainly environmental justice benefits. Thank you. Other comments on this, Kate?
Well, and in the Global South, I mean, I started my career fighting fossil fuel infrastructure with indigenous communities. And if you go to places like the Niger Delta, you will see children running around gas flaring with oil spills on the ground. And this is pipelines that should be fixed, right? This is not beyond the wit of man to make that infrastructure safe. It's not acceptable. So alongside the air pollution, there's often other kinds of toxic pollution and hazard for communities, and frontline communities usually don't benefit from the infrastructure being there in the first place. And when it comes to waste, because the cost of waste is not internalized, to use the economic jargon, rich countries ship waste all around the world and it ends up in landfills in developing countries. It's outrageous. So we need to work on our waste problem and we need to work on the role that multinationals play in developing countries and make sure that they're meeting stronger standards both at home and overseas at the same time. We haven't got time to do this slowly. We have to do this decade.
Well, we have time for a couple of additional questions, and looks like we have one in the front. Terrific.
Hi, Karen Florini with Climate Central. But in an earlier role, I was with the State Department as the Deputy Climate Envoy, and methane was in my portfolio. The message that I wanted to write to my successor, had there been one, because of an intervening event there wasn't, would have been to say one crucially important thing that you can do on methane, it doesn't cost anything at all, is to stop using the misleading terminology that methane is only 25 times as potent as carbon dioxide. That's if you're looking over 100 years. You should not be looking over 100 years. Most of the methane is gone after a dozen years. We should be using the potency figure of at most 20 years, which is 86, or better yet, the first year after it's emitted, which is 120 times. Para, I'm looking at you because you were saying before, why didn't we know about this before? And in part it was because we were using the wrong multiplier. That is a crucially important point, because part of what needs to happen here is the word needs to get out, not just to the policymakers, but to the public as a whole, how serious the methane problem is, so that we can localize the understanding of where it is, where it's coming from, what's causing it, to deal with some of the root causes. And we've got to stop using that artificially low multiplier number.
Can we also stop using the phrase gas as a transition fuel?
Yeah.
If you include the impact of methane, gas is not a transition fuel. And I would applaud the financial institutions that announced today that they're going to stop financing of oil and gas. We need a tsunami of commitments to stop financing oil and gas. Gas is as bad as coal if you include the life cycle methane emissions and the radiative forcing. We can't use gas as a transition fuel. We need to go from coal to clean without going via gas. We need to solve that problem in industry. We need to solve that problem in pipelines. Gas is not a transition.
All the leaks.
And if I may add, I think we need to stop using the term leak all the time, because the new satellite technology and the cameras on the ground are showing us that oftentimes we're really talking about massive, massive plumes.
Yeah.
Terrific answers. Any other contributions? I think we'll have one final question if there is one. All right. Well, if not, this has been an outstanding panel, and I want to thank all of the funders who spoke, as well as, of course, Richard Lawrence and Larry from the Hewlett Foundation for leading the effort to develop this global methane funding hub. The takeaways for me from this session include that reducing methane emissions this decade must be a priority for global climate, but also for public health and environmental justice. That an initial fund of $328 million has been set up, but this is really just the start and will help to scale up and accelerate solutions to reduce methane mitigation all around the world, including in the Global South. It's going to take partnerships and accountability to achieve this success on this, and it's time to aim high and for all of us to rise to the methane moment. So I want to thank all of you for joining us. Thank you for being here at the Methane Pavilion today, and I look forward to the reception.